Hi everyone, and welcome back to Farrand Film. And today I'm bringing you my first in what are going to be weekly episodes of reactions to the series The Last of Us that has been on HBO. If you haven't already and you're interested in my views on the full season, a spoiler-free view on the full season, go back to the channel and watch the spoiler-free preview. This one is going to be not spoiler heavy, but it's definitely going to contain spoilers. So if you've not yet seen episode 1, I recommend that you go and watch it first and then come back to this afterwards. Now, the one thing that I wanted to mention first of all is that it is called When You're Lost in the Darkness. Now, when I was given the season to watch or the screeners to watch, one of the things that they made very, very clear is that one thing that was under embargo was the titles of the episodes because they didn't want to give anything away. Now, I actually didn't know them before now. I assumed that every episode, because they said that, would then open with the titles. That's not the case. And I found the title when I pressed record on my Skybox to set the series link. So When You're Lost in the Darkness is obviously a reoccurring quote. It's something that happens quite a little bit in the game, and it happens quite a little bit in the series as well. But to kick off, we start with some men in 1968, obviously academics, professionals, medical professionals, discussing the possibility of a fungus-based health epidemic, pandemic, whatever it is that you want to call it, which we, as people who've played the game, would know is similar to the cordyceps virus. This idea that it's a fungus or fungi-based disease or infection that is causing the mutation and is causing the basically zombie-like, even though they tend not to use the word zombie, they tend to refer to it instead as an infection. I thought this was very interesting. I thought this was a very interesting introduction to the show. I thought it was very Mazin. I thought it was more to do with Craig Mazin's sort of style coming across and getting his sort of thumbprint or fingerprints all over the material, the source material. Then we jump ahead to the narrative actually kicking off in 2003. And we see Joel living with his brother Tommy and living with his daughter Sarah. Now, Sarah, if you've played the game, you knew or you would know Sarah's fate going into the episode. The development of Sarah I really enjoyed because it's more than just a character on a sofa like she's in the game. You know, the game kicks off, she's on the sofa, she's asleep. Joel comes home. She gives him the watch for his birthday. She falls asleep watching a film. He takes up to bed. She wakes up. She goes downstairs. Joel runs in. She actually doesn't see any infected at that point until Joel shoots the neighbor. And then they're immediately sort of picked up by Tommy and taken away. Whereas this, you get so much more. So, you know, we're seeing her. She's thoughtful. She's caring. She's selfless. She helps the neighbors out. We see her going into school and then going into town and getting a watch fixed for Joe's birthday. She goes home. She goes to see the neighbors, actually. Actually, before that, just to mention the panic, the impending doom that was happening in the watch shop where I believe it's the watch shop's owner's wife comes out and says, no, we're closing, you know, you need to move on. You can get this idea that something bad has happened, something's not quite right there. After Sarah's visited the watch shop, she goes home and she visits the neighbors. And I thought that was the first little bit of horror in the series where, you know, Sarah's sort of she's in our focus, but then out of focus with that shallow depth of field behind her. You see the elderly woman in the wheelchair just slightly beginning to turn, sort of reminiscent of those again zombie-like movements where her head's sort of flicking a little bit to the side and it looks a little bit jarring. And there's that ominous score building underneath, and we eventually go into full infected mode when Sarah eventually wakes up, realizes that Joel's not there, goes into the neighbors, is walking through the neighbor's house. She steps in this huge puddle of blood on the floor, and we see the aforementioned elderly lady, the infected lady, with tendrils coming out of her mouth. And again, that's our first look at the tendrils. This idea that these things are the things that have replaced spores in the series, and they're disgusting sort of moving fungi like vines almost sticking out of this woman's mouth. So, you know, Sarah goes to run away. She then bumps into Tommy and Joel, who have just come back in the car. Joel kills the woman with a wrench. Again, quite a brutal sequence. His neighbors are coming out. He's telling them to go and hide away. He's driving off. Again, then sort of the infected, I suppose, then going on to infect the neighbors is again in the background. We don't necessarily see that. It's a very faithful, or fairly faithful anyway, adaptation of the game with the driving away sequence. There's so many things that we pass of, like, we're turning towards the city, we go past the burning house, or the burning barn. We don't stop for people on the side of the road. Yeah, they've got a kid, but we've got a kid too. They're going through the town. They go past the theater at one point. It's not sort of head on like it is in the game. And the bit that I just thought was an absolute crazy addition was the plane crash that causes Joel, Tommy, and Sarah to stop in the car, or to eventually crash the car. Just the idea of that plane just completely crashing in the middle of the road. Sarah's death. Now, this is arguably the most prevalent thing that happens in this episode, in that it's much more traumatic than in the game. And you get the whole sort of like, we're not injured, we're not sick, my daughter's hurt her ankle, the guy's on his radio. It's the guy repeats, the soldier repeats yes sir 3 times. It's the third yes sir that is the sort of instant, oh, this is bad, this is going to turn on them. You hear the gunshots, Joe falls to the ground, he gets saved by Tommy, and then it's Tommy's line of, Joel, where it's sort of like, it's hampered with grief. He knows what's happened. He knows what's about to happen. Joel goes over some solid work from Pedro Pascal in this scene. He's just gripping her, crying. He's saying, come on, baby girl, come on, we got to get up. We got to go do this. Her body just goes limp. And and it's so powerful, and it's so much. I think it delivered it so much better than the game did. It's an emotional sequence anyway. I think having played the game twice and then seeing the episode now twice, what will be 3 times, you get a little bit desensitized to it. I'm recording this before I know Ollie's reaction, and I'm recording this before I know my wife's reaction, so I'm intrigued to see how they react to Sarah's death. We then get a 20-year jump, as with the game, and we get introduced to Fedra through this sort of wandering little girl. And I must admit, when I saw that the first time, I did think, like, oh, is this Ellie? Is this Ellie before, she's going to grow up and all that kind of stuff? I didn't know. I didn't think that they'd cast a younger version. And obviously it doesn't turn out that way. But again, this idea of introducing Fedra, not even mentioning the name, just seeing the uniforms, seeing them, they're almost interrogating this poor girl in the wheelchair. They kind of sort of strapped her in. They have that sort of device that checks whether or not they're infected. That very simple and really useful, just red glow and the slight nod to each other that the two characters had. Instantly we know, this girl's infected. It's not going to go well for her. They try and reassure her, and then immediately, next shot, the burning bodies. And this is something that I will mention now and will continue to mention in episodes to come. I think one of the most successful things about the game, and one of the most successful things about the series, is the horror that comes from the humans. Never mind, the horror that we expect from the infected. I think there might be people who might come to this expecting a Walking Dead type, just full zombie show. I think there are some episodes to come where there are scenes that are reminiscent of things like that. But I think a lot more of the horror in this show comes from people's motivations, characters' motivations. I mentioned in my spoiler-free preview about a character that's going to come up later on called Caitlin. And again, she is a quite a horrific character just in the things that she does. When we see David again, he is quite horrific of a character. I'm very, very intrigued already, and I know they've only just finished it, and I know they're wrapping it up and bundling out and all that kind of stuff. But when it comes to them adapting season 2, the Seraphites are going to be the thing that I am the most looking forward to, because I cannot wait to see how they bring them to the screen. I always very vividly in my mind remember playing The Last of Us Part 2, going through those sort of tall bushes or trees as Ellie, and all of a sudden these hooded figures appear And if you get spotted, they're trying to shoot you down with arrows and things like that. And I thought, what is this? What's the game turning to here? And then being introduced to the Seraphites and those specific types of characters, and they're almost like Firefly-esque as we get into in this episode. So I'm really intrigued to see how they bring that into the game, into the series, I should say. And we're already at the beginning here. We're adding layers back to the show. We're adding layers to the narrative of Joel. Joel smuggling drugs for Fedra agents, for Fedra officers, and they're trying to tip him off on certain things, and he's being paid in rations, and you're getting a real feel for how the world has developed in the 20 years since the infection began. I enjoyed Tess's intro. I thought, again, we know Tess from the game. She's a very, very strong character in the game, and her sort of, unfortunately, on the hand of a beating from Robert's men here is much more significant, I think, than her introduction in the game. The Firefly introduction, again, this idea that there is this sort of anti-establishment rebellion group that are around. We never know when they're going to pop up. They're attacking certain things, they're leaving the mark on certain things. Nobody really knows. The sort of, at the minute, on the ether, on the periphery of what it is that we're expecting from these episodes, but we'll get to them further down the line. Ellie's introduction, she's all chained up, she's got nowhere to go. The woman walks in and says, you're going to count to 10, and she knows the drill. She's been there for ages. What that does, very smart piece of writing, it tells us that she's been there a while. She knows to put her arms out. She knows to count to 10. She knows, or she actually wants to flip the woman off and give her absolute maximum sass. This was the scene that sold me on Bella Ramsey's Ellie. I thought, yeah, they're getting that dialogue right. She's portraying it perfectly. Joel's hunt for Tommy still ongoing as we get with the game. He doesn't know where his brother is. We can only assume at this point that they've not seen each other in a large amount of years, maybe even the 20 years that the series has gone on for. So he's searching maps. He's got his radio signal up, and the nice little hints towards Bill and Frank at this point, or just a little bit later on. Marlene, the introduction of Marlene, again, she's sort of very domineering. She's telling the team, they have to follow orders. This is what they're going to do. First hint at her leading the Fireflies. She gets into a bit of a thing with Robert, and then we all sort of come together about 20 minutes before the end of the episode with Joel and Ellie's introduction to each other. And I think there's going to be a lot of fans waiting for this to happen. It happens quite late in the episode. Already, they're very, very unsure about each other. And the one thing that I do love about the series, and you will see this from this episode going all the way through, is that it does take a while for their relationship to settle, just like it does in the game, just for them to get comfortable enough with each other, for it then to have the sort of payoff that it does eventually have. And I think both, Pedro Pascal and Bella Ramsey are perfectly cast, I think. I know there's been a lot of sort of umming and ahhing about, oh, you don't look like Joel, and oh, you don't look like Ellie. Like, don't be so precious about these characters. These characters, you can see them over my shoulder. They are fiction. They're pieces of fiction. They look like that based on what the developers of the game made them look like. And you come in 10 years after this point, you're not going to be able to cast people and look exactly like them anymore. It's just the way that it is. Daniel Radcliffe doesn't look like Harry Potter on the front of the Philosopher's Stone book. He looks fairly similar, but that's the best they can do. This, perfectly cast. I would much sooner have somebody look slightly different and be perfect than have somebody who can't act who looks exactly like them. And I think we've gotten the better part of the deal here with Pedro Pascal and Bella Ramsey, and you will continue to see it in the episodes to come. I thought the choice of cliffhanger for this episode was very, very poignant in that, they've agreed to take Ellie to where she needs to go. They're having to be very, very careful, maneuvering around the QZ. They come out, they get caught by the Fedra agent. Joel absolutely loses his mind on this Fedra agent, beats him to a pulp. I suppose essentially kills him, if not leaves him there very bloodied and bruised. And then they begin to see that, actually, Ellie's infected because she was I don't even know how you can. She was doofered by the doofer, by the guy, before he died. So we know that she's infected at this point. She shows a bite. She says, it's been there for weeks. It's not a recent thing. I'm not infected. I'm fine. And we perfectly set up that sort of end the episode. Where's it going to go from here? Now, one thing that I do want to mention is we get the Bill and Frank hints. We get all that kind of stuff. The ending on Depeche Mode, I Want to Take a Ride with My Best Friend. That song is now an earworm. That song is now on my playlist. It has been since I watched the episode for the first time. When I mention needle drops, that's one of the needle drops. Keep it in mind, okay? It's going to come back and it's going to hit you like a sucker punch. Really enjoyed this episode. I must admit, the first time I saw it, I did think, I felt a bit like it was 2 episodes stitched together, in that originally, I'm sure something came out where it was like we were going to get 10 episodes for the first season. And I can imagine that episode 1 would have been the start of this episode till Sarah's death, before we moved 20 years on. And then it would have been 20 years on to finding out Ellie's infected. And I think actually stitching them together probably makes more sense, probably makes more narrative sense, because otherwise, if you watch that first episode and Sarah dies at the end, you're going to be a bit like, oh, well, what happens now? You're a bit sort of lost. But then it taking you forward, you're not necessarily, it's not pulling you out of the narrative. It's keeping you in there while it feeds you everything else that it needs to do. So again, I think it was a very successful first episode. I hope that everybody who's watched it really enjoys it, whether you played the game or not. I'm more intrigued to see the reception of the people who haven't played the game, because like I mentioned before, I think we who have played the game come to this series with a certain set of expectations, and I'd love to know more about what people think who haven't played the game. So if you're watching this and you want to let me know what you thought, feel free to leave a comment underneath. But I'm going to kind of wrap this one up now. This one is probably has been shorter than the ones that I'm intending. The idea is that myself and Ollie are going to get together and do these. This one I'm able to sort of pre-record before the episode goes out on HBO. So I rewatched it again last night. So this one is going to go up, as you will know, directly after it's finished. So as soon as I can afterwards. From now on, if it is me and Ollie, it will be more so of a UK Monday night around about 7-8 o'clock time, just so it gives us time, get home from work, watch the episode, come and do our reactions, all that kind of stuff. Anywhere it's just me and I'm flying solo, I'll try and get them out as early as possible. But I hope you're enjoying this series of videos. I'm very much enjoying covering the series. There's much more for us to talk about further down the line, much more Easter eggy type stuff. The attention to detail in these episodes are superb, and this is the setup, the exposition, the terrifying, the emotional. This is more of what the season has got for you. It's set the tone perfectly well. I hope you enjoy it, and I will see you next time. As usual, stay safe, look after each other, all that kind of stuff. If you've not set your records, and I will see you next week for episode 2.